Hello everybody, it's me again! Woohoo! So, today's set of videos is going to be con law. Con law, yay! Specifically, we're going to be talking about federalism in con law. We're not going to be talking about individual liberties. That's its own course. That's con law 2, this is con law 1. So, I'm going to start with basically all of the standing stuff. Then I'm going to do a non-dormant commerce clause video, a dormant commerce clause video, privileges and immunities, and then I'll make a few short videos on different separation of powers issues. So, what is justiciability? That's what we're talking about. Justiciability is the idea of whether or not a case can be brought before the Supreme Court, the federal courts at all. To make this very clear, this is a constitutional requirement. These are court-made tests, and they're unavoidable. You cannot get past them. Congress cannot legislate past them. The fact of the matter is, for Article 3 issues, unless a Second Amendment comes in and deals, a different amendment comes in and deals with this situation, you have to follow Article 3. The only exception to these Article 3 standing issues are going to be 14th Amendment issues, which only allow for suits when there is state action, and that's a whole different thing, and I'll talk about that at the end. Like, not even in this video, it's going to be like 7 videos from now. So, justiciability. Your first basic thing you need to know is standing. What is standing? Well, it's 3 factors. Injury, otherwise known as injury in fact, causation, and redressability. Injury is the most complicated, I would say, of these. There needs to be an injury. You have to be hurt. You have to have a right violated. You have to have your property taken. You have to have been hurt. Whatever it is, for the court to hear it, there needs to be an injury. That's because the U.S. Federal courts are allowed to hear cases and controversies. It's not a case and a controversy if there's been no violation of anyone's rights. And that's because we have an adversarial system. The court will not issue advisory opinions on what it thinks is right in situations that have not come before it. If you've ever watched a Supreme Court justice before the United States Senate, before they get sworn in and they're going through the whole ringer for the advice and consent of the Senate, they will answer to most questions, they will answer with, I could not comment on a case that is not before me. And that's sort of the idea here, is that they're not going to comment on cases that don't exist. That is not the purpose of the Supreme Court. You can judge the wisdom of that. I think that it is poor wisdom. I think that it would be much better for everyone in the entirety of the United States if constitutional principles were sorted out. I think that it would be much more logical if our good friend Chief Justice John Jay had sat down with the other, I want to say 6 justices at the time. I do not believe actually I think it might have been 5. It wasn't 9, that's all I know. He should have sat down with them and they should have hammered out the constitutional interpretive principles that they would be using. And those can evolve. I think they should be able to evolve, but I think they should be known to everyone. I do not like the fact that there is a betting market around the Supreme Court. That's not a joke, that's a real thing. If you would like to go bet on Supreme Court cases, you can. And I know that would still exist conceptually, but the fact that there are people out here gambling about whether or not certain fundamental cases are going to come out one way or another is upsetting to me. I think constitutional principles should be more available to the people that have them, right? Anyway, but that's the case in controversy. There needs to be an actual case, no advisory opinions. And back to the whole injury thing, you have to be injured. And there's a lot of different things that count as injuries. Environmental injuries are a thing. I was going to go to the lake, but they polluted it. Now the lake is ugly. I don't want to go anymore. They took away the beauty of the lake that I was entitled to. You're entitled to that. Anything you're entitled to that has been taken away from you, you can sue over. You won't always win, but you can sue. Remember, this is not a how-to-win guide right now. This is a will the court listen to you. And this is federal courts only. State courts are not subject to Article 3. Mostly. I imagine a lot of states have very similar requirements. So, after that, you need causation. Causation is pretty simple. It's, did the person you're suing cause it? The general test here is proximate causation. In law, generally, there's this test called but-for causation, where whenever the word causation gets brought up, the but-for test also exists. But the but-for test is almost never used, because why are you suing them if they didn't cause this, right? So the but-for causes is sort of, this would not have happened if they didn't do it, right? If a meteor falls on me, I can't sue, my neighbor Bob, unless he pushed me into the meteor, because the meteor was going to hit me no matter what Bob did. Bob does not have control over the meteors as far as I'm aware. Yeah, so there has to be actual causation. There's also this thing called proximate causation, right? My example for how I explain proximate causation, I just used this on a test actually, is Boeing responsible if a drunk man flies their planes? No. There needs to be a logical connection. There's no real test as far as I'm aware, and I will go check just in case I'm missing a really obvious but proximate causation test, but it's sort of just a logic thing, and I'll go check right now, because as I've talked about before, I'm not a professor, I'm not anything, I am a 1L student who is learning these things for like the second time, maybe the third, if we're really feeling smart. Yeah. So it has to be fairly traceable. Yep. There you go. That is exactly what it is. I was right. It is not a hard and fast test so much as it is a test of, come on, man, really? Right. So again, you can't sue Boeing for a drunk man flying their planes. The one edge case people like to talk about is, and there have been suits about this, is gun manufacturers, can they be sued for people misusing their guns? No, that doesn't make sense. That would make it essentially illegal to manufacture a gun, since you would be responsible. You're not responsible if someone beats someone with a hammer. You might say, oh, well, guns are only used for, they're not. Guns are used for other things. They're used for people to shoot targets. They're used for people to hunt. They're used for people to put on their walls. You can argue whether or not people should do that, but they do all of those things. So you can't deny that guns have purposes beyond, murder. Again, that's not an argument for or against anything. That's just kind of the case that a lot of people, will actively try to ignore but-for causation in those cases. And that's a really good example, I think, of but-for causation that has practical, sort of real-life use. All right, after that, injury, causation, and redressability. So, fun fact, you can sue God. That's just a thing you can do. Feel free to try it. Your case will be dismissed. Well, it'll be dismissed, but it won't be because of anything normal. It'll be dismissed because they can't find God. They can't deliver your subpoena. They can't deliver your summons. That's the word. They can't deliver your summons to God. So, unfortunately, some other courts have said that they don't have jurisdiction over God. A few courts have even, said, okay, yeah, God's all around us. You can sue him, and we may even issue a judgment against him. I don't know if any courts have actually successfully issued a judgment against God, but I know that no court has successfully enforced a judgment against God. Anyway, what does this have to do with redressability? Injuries by God are not redressable. You're not going to get a remedy out of the courts. And that's sort of the point is, if it can't be fixed by money or us telling them to stop, then the injury's not redressable. And this is not a common issue. I'll once again summon my outline just to make sure that I'm not missing a test that you might care about. Nope, yeah, there isn't really a test. This is another sort of proximate causation thing, and the court basically has two remedies available, equity and law. Equity is not money, it's injunction, and law is monetary damages. I'm stealing that from property, but useful distinction. And those are the three major elements of standing. Now, there's a whole bunch of little tiny kinds of standing. These are little mini standings. Now, to be clear, I know someone on the test tomorrow is going to mess this up. For every kind of specialized standing, all other standing requirements must be met. You cannot get around injury, causation, or redressability using a special standing procedure. Okay? We all got that? Thank you. First kind of standing I'm going to talk about, legislature standing. Doesn't exist. You cannot sue because you're a legislature. Being a legislature does not create any special injuries to you except for the fact that if your vote is wrongfully invalidated, that would be an injury to you. If your vote is taken away from you, that's an injury to you. If it has to do with something on the floor, you were injured. If it has to do with a passed bill, probably not, unless the bill passed because of something on the floor, right? If you're a legislature and you were stripped of your vote and that's what let the bill pass, absolutely you can sue, and that would in fact invalidate the bill, probably. Again, it would depend on the state, it would depend on the bill, and it would depend on the court. But, generally speaking, that's the only kind of legislative standing. If you ever see a legislator suing, go, legislative standing doesn't exist, because it doesn't. Even the example I was just talking about, where a vote gets invalidated, that's not special standing. That is an injury happened to you. That is a regular direct injury to you. Okay, next we got taxpayer standing. Taxpayer standing does not exist. I remember I'm trying to remember if it's a citizen, I believe it's citizen standing that has the really specialized, yeah. So taxpayer standing, you cannot sue except for as a violation of the Establishment Clause, right? So the only time you can sue on the basis that you're a taxpayer is if the government gives money to a religion. Money to a religion. I'm aware that planes and even stock are worth money. The government can give that to a religion because that's property the government holds. I don't know how much stock the government holds, but I imagine that somewhere, somehow they hold a few $1 billion in it. No clue, though. I'm vaguely curious if the federal government holds any substantial amount of stock. I know they hold some amount, and I know obviously all of their pension funds do, but anyway, well, that's a fundamentally interesting question. I might go Google that later. Anyway, so, yeah, the only time that taxpayer standing exists is when the government gives money to a religion. That is it. Anything else is not allowed. Citizen standing does not exist. No generalized standing. Okay, repeat after me, especially me who just messed this up on a practice question. No generalized standing. Article 3. Article 3. That's Article 3. What does Article 3 beat out? Any law Congress wants to pass. Congress cannot create generalized grievances no matter how badly they really, really want to. They can't do it. Ever. Except for 14th Amendment stuff. Push that all over this way. Okay, that's state power doctrine. We'll get to it. Anyway, so no generalized standing. Okay, that's we call that citizen standing. Doesn't exist. Two kinds of standing that do exist, because taxpayer standing kind of exists, but there's the two kinds of standing that really exist. Third party standing. You must have been in some way injured. There must be some reason why the party you're suing on behalf of can't come into court. And there's a third thing, but I think it's one of those like tiny things that's kind of hard to test on. Let me check, just because don't want to be wrong. I don't like to be incorrect. It's not good for me. Third party standing, there we go. Nope, come on. Where's my third party standing? There we go. I was right, yeah. Okay, here we go. I was right, yeah. I accidentally said 2 steps at the same time and only put up 1 finger. So, let's go over the 3 steps of legislator standing. 1, some reason why the third party isn't in court with us today. They're a baby is a good one, generally speaking. You must have also been harmed. And third, your harm must be related to their harm, right? It can't be like a separate injury, right? I mean, it can be, but it has to be a related separate injury. Obviously, you can't have the same injury to 2 people, no matter how hard you try. All injuries are individualized. That's why some wrongful death suits get you peanuts, and some wrongful death suits get you millions. Feel free to discuss that in the comments below about your philosophy on how we value life in courts. I don't know. Anyway, that is pretty much everything that comes under action. I forgot about organizational standing. I almost forgot the very important one. Organizational standing exists when 3 criteria are met. Numero uno. the organization has a purpose germane, that's the term used, to the suit. If there is a suit for this on a test, it's going to be environmental because that's easy. It's an environmental group. Environmental groups have standing when it comes to environmental issues, right? At least germaneness. Second, there has to have been an injury. This is really easy, especially for those environmental groups. I was going to go to the lake. I'm a member of the Plant Lovers Collective. We're going to sue now, the Plant Lovers Collective and I. And that's allowed. Third, there needs to be no reason for the individual members to need to show up. If I'm a member of the Plant Lovers Collective and somebody just blew up the most important plant in the world, trademark pending, and we want to sue over it, we can't really do that because what we're looking for there is damages. Now, punitive damages maybe, but damages individually, no, right? Same thing, right? With injunctions generally, right? If you're suing for an injunction, you don't need someone individual there. You just need an injunction. Everybody would get the same injunction. But if everybody would be getting, $6 or whatever, can't do that, right? You can't sue when the damages will be individualized, basically, is the third rule. All right, now I'm going to hit ripeness and mootness because these are easy, and then I'll touch on political questions. Ripeness, the case must actually be happening. So the injury needs to have occurred or be like really close. Like, if I'm in Florida and I'm tied to the train tracks and there's a train in, Los Angeles coming in about 5 days. No, sorry, not close enough. Let's say the train's in Louisiana. That's closer, but still probably too far. Let's say the train is, 2 divergences of the track away, right? The track branches, say it's 2 branches away, maybe. Say it's 1 branch away, maybe. As soon as it goes on to that one where it's guaranteed to run you over, then you can definitely sue, if that makes sense, right? It needs to be almost certain. And if it's not almost certain, case isn't ripe. A big example of non-ripe cases. You can't sue over a bill that has not passed. No matter how badly you want to. You can't do it. Okay? That's the big one, but there's plenty of other kinds of injuries where your ripeness is not present. What is mootness? There's no longer an issue. Say that I am the glorious company of Pollution Inc., and we pollute everywhere. We love to pollute. And we use our big pollution factory to pollute everything. And say you're suing for an injunction, not for damages, suing for an injunction to shut down the factory. Say the factory gets nuked. You could never put another factory there because there's a crater 6 miles deep and it would be really expensive to fill in. You can't enjoin the non-existent factory. Now, if we just shut down the factory, we could turn it right back on. So that's the exception to mootness. And we'll talk about the exception to mootness in just a second. But mootness is when the injury is no longer there. What are the exceptions to mootness? 1, I don't count this as an exception. Everyone says this is an exception and it makes no sense to me. Collateral consequences. That means you still have an injury. Collateral consequences are, sure, maybe the main injury you were suing over is done and over with, but there's still more injuries. So the number one example people use here is someone who gets found guilty of a felony, appeals their felony conviction, but gets released from prison after a year, and they're still in the middle of their case. They still have a controversy because there are rights taken away from them for being a felon. They still have an injury. It's not an exception to mootness. I think it's more of a, hey, pay attention. There might still be an injury even if you don't think there's an injury. I think that is a better explainer, but, that's the exception. That's one of the exceptions to mootness. 3 more. Capable of repetition yet evading review. It needs to be capable of repetition to this particular plaintiff. How do we know it's capable of repetition to a given plaintiff? Well, you'll know. There isn't really a test for this, but Roe v. Wade's the example that everybody uses. In Roe, the woman suing, whose name I know is Jane Roe in the case, but she has an actual human name now that we are all supposed to know, but I don't. Oops. She could get pregnant again. Obviously, by the time she got to the Supreme Court, she wasn't pregnant anymore. But she could get pregnant again. That's 100% capable of repetition. And it needs to be logically capable of repetition, right? If she was 70, they might be like, well, you're never going to get pregnant again. Then again, fun fact, I believe the oldest pregnancy was of a woman who was about 72? No, I think it was like a woman who was in her 90s. Anyway, don't let that happen. That sounds terrible. Anyway, yeah, so that's your second of your exceptions. Your third exception is voluntary cession. If I turn off the pollution factory and I go, haha, Mr. Court, can't enjoin me now, I'm not doing it. And the court will go, you're never allowed to pollute. You know, Mr. Pollution has to stop his pollution. Why? Because if you could voluntarily end, you would just, go through 9 months of trial and 8 appeals and spend $6 billion because you really want to pollute, and then you get into court, right before the order is given, and you go, well, we stop. We're done now. No more. We're stopping. And the court goes, case dismissed. They stopped. You can't enjoin it. The next day, you can flip right on the factory. It needs to be very, very certain that they're not going to repeat. One big example would be, say, a state passes a new law that changes the previous law. That might be enough, but then again, they could, whenever they wanted to, return. The example that is used is similar. It's a municipality was doing something, and then a state passes a law that they can't anymore. That's fairly certain that they're not going to do it anymore, because generally we assume that state governments are not going to, or municipal governments aren't going to violate state law. We generally presume this. It doesn't mean they won't, but it's good to presume. And I guess it's not good to presume. People keep saying that. All right, and finally, the last one, just because I don't want to... Yeah, class actions. I always forget this one. This one is one of those, you know when you see it. Class actions. So if you don't understand how a class action works, I only vaguely do. So a class action is basically, hello, my name is Tom. I'm suing on behalf of every Tom everywhere against Tom Haters Incorporated. Now, let's say I am trans, and I am Tom, and I decide that I no longer wish to be Tom. I wish to be Tammy. Tom Haters Incorporated is no longer affecting me. That being said, all of the other Toms who are suing with me in our big class, they still have an injury. So as long as any plaintiff in the class still has an injury, you're good, right? You can keep suing. So let's say, now Tammy, she actually, I believe, can stay on as class head, even if she's no longer injured. But I'm not certain about that, because I know very little about class actions. But yes, class actions are one of the exceptions to mootness. That's mootness and ripeness. Last thing is political questions. Yay! What's a political question? Court didn't want to talk about it. That's what it is. It's the court going, I guess we could hear this, but we don't want to. So, what is a political question? A political question is when there are 5 justices on the court who don't want to have to make a ruling on something political. They could, but they just don't want to. You might say, Adam, that is a grave, deep insult to the concept of the political questions doctrine. It is an important part of constitutional law. Blah, blah. No, it's not. Anyone who thinks that the Supreme Court applies the political questions doctrine in a fair and equitable manner is kidding themselves. The doctrine exists solely so they can avoid awkward situations. Oops. Yeah. Anyway. I'm not throwing shade at any given justice. I'm throwing shade at the entirety of the court right now because they all do it. They go, it's a get out of jail free card. So, what is the political question doctrine? Political question doctrine is the court can avoid questions in the following circumstances. First, and these are all factors. They don't have to always agree. So, first thing is if it invokes separation of powers. Second, if it's going to lead to proclamations from different branches saying different things. Third, if it's going to embarrass the government. Fourth, if it's going to embarrass one part of the government, which these are just one thing. I don't understand why they're one thing. Okay, but they're listed as 2. The next is if it requires a policy determination. What that means is it's you're suing the government and we don't yeah. That's really what it is, because everything is a policy determination. It's impossible. The rules of justiciability are a policy determination made in the 1800s. Everything's a policy determination. Yeah, it's a very specific policy determination, but still policy determination. So it's baffling that the courts think that invoking policy determination is a good argument. I'm gonna write a note on that, I think, for my whatchamacallit, journal competition. And let me see the last one, just so I know. Oh, and there's maybe a need to adhere to previously made decisions. That one, not really going to get invoked. You know how you know it's not really going to get invoked? Because the Supreme Court decided to overturn some of its most important precedent recently, which was super policy, by the way. Okay, just an FYI. I love the Warren Court, and I tend to disagree with the idea that the court should be out here making policy determinations, but the Warren Court totally should be. Love them. They did a great job. So anything the Warren Court said, they should just keep it. But the court should stop making policy determinations. Make Congress do it. We elect those guys for a reason. But anyway, sorry. I just love the Warren Court. They did everything. Like, every good Supreme Court decision you've ever heard about was made by the Warren Court. Except for, Augerville v. Hodges? I think I say Augerfell wrong. I think it's Obergefell or something. I don't know. I guess Lawrence v. Texas was also not them. Lawrence v. Texas surprises me because I think that was a fairly conservative court. Anyway, that is justiciability. That is like 30% of the entire course.